For years, a lingering question has haunted the minds of the British public. Why did Prince Philip, the trusted lifelong companion of Queen Elizabeth II, choose to live in seclusion at Wood Farm on the Sandringham Estate, instead of staying by the Queen's side in her final years? This royal couple had weathered countless historical storms together, from World War to family crises, and the harsh transformations of the post-Brexit era. And yet, as Britain stepped into the 21st century, the silence between them sparked a wave of sensational speculation. Was their royal marriage truly as perfect as it seemed? Or was it merely a beautifully painted facade, hiding deep fractures beneath the glossy surface of media portrayals? The press once described Wood Farm as a retreat, a place where Prince Philip could live a life free from ceremony and the relentless spotlight. But with that came a flood of theories. An unofficial separation, a belated sulk, or perhaps even secret agreements never disclosed to the public. Throughout all those years, the British royal family, as always, offered no explanation, and that silence only fueled the flames of public curiosity. But everything changed. In a rare and shocking interview, Princess Anne, the steadfast, composed, and famously blunt daughter of the royal family, finally broke that silence. She did not just speak of her father as a man of resilience, but also revealed the deeper reasons behind his decision to live apart at Wood Farm, a confession both sincere and sharp, and more importantly, one that forced an entire nation to reconsider the almost mythical relationship between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip under an entirely new light. According to Anne, her father's decision to reside at Wood Farm was not a sign of estrangement from her mother. Quite the opposite. It was a reflection of extraordinary understanding. My father needed a space of his own. My mother understood that. They were not apart because of a rift, but because their love was deep enough not to cling, she said, her determined gaze piercing through years of media fabrications. To Anne, it was not a withdrawal. It was a deliberate choice, a decision rooted in mutual respect and a shared recognition of individual needs after more than 70 years of companionship. This explanation did not just stun the media. It compelled many to reevaluate how they had previously perceived Prince Philip. He was not a cold man fleeing royal life, but a husband who understood the limits of personal freedom within a marriage steeped in ceremonial obligation. And Queen Elizabeth, the ever-composed icon of grace, was not a woman left behind, but a wife generous enough to let her partner live in accordance with his nature, even if that meant solitude. Yet, amid the praise for this modern love story, questions remain unanswered. Was this truly Philip's personal decision alone? Or were there other pressures from within the royal family? A life shackled by duty, status, and countless prying eyes. Was it truly his choice? Or silent resignation? And more importantly, why now? Why did Anne decide to reveal what was once deemed unspeakable? Could this be her only way to protect the legacy and dignity of her parents? In an age where truth is so easily distorted by the viral speed of social media. Or perhaps, beneath this seemingly humanizing explanation, lies yet another royal secret waiting to be uncovered. Believe it or not, Princess Anne's words have reignited a story Britain thought it had buried. A story of compromise, respect, and a kind of love that transcends conventional standards. But is it enough to convince you? Tell us your thoughts. If you believe this is the truth, that Prince Philip chose to live at Wood Farm out of mutual understanding and agreement with Queen Elizabeth, leave a comment with the number 1. But if you suspect there are still deeper secrets hidden beneath it all, comment with a 0. We want to hear your voice. Because sometimes, the truth lies in the hands of those brave enough to ask the question. He was not born to be a symbol, nor was he raised in the warm embrace of affection. The heart of Prince Philip, The man who stood behind Queen Elizabeth II for over 7 decades was forged not in velvet and luxury, but in storms and separation. Few know that the Queen's loyal husband was once a child without a country, without a home, growing up amidst coups, the screams of war, and even the whispers behind the closed doors of psychiatric hospitals where his mother was confined. It was not just a stolen childhood. It was the beginning of a harsh destiny, one that shaped a cold, resilient, and deeply reserved character. So much so that even while living separately at Wood Farm, he still made Britain wonder whether something hidden was being kept from the public. Philip was born in 1921 in a small villa on the island of Corfu, Greece. Royal blood ran through his veins. He was a prince of Greece and Denmark, but that title existed only on paper, for when he was just 18 months old, his entire family was exiled following a military coup. Philip was smuggled out of Greece in a makeshift cot made from an orange crate, as soldiers searched for his father, Prince Andrew, who narrowly escaped execution. From that moment, Philip's life veered onto a path that no one in the Greek royal family could have imagined. Becoming a wanderer, living from one aunt's home to another across Germany, France, and then England. His father, a charming but indifferent man, soon abandoned the family. Living a drifting life in southern France with lovers and strong liquor, his mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, after being diagnosed with schizophrenia, was committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland. Philip was left alone. From a royal child, he became a young man without nationality, without family. Letters sent out brought no replies. Dinner tables were quiet, joyless. Christmases passed with only silence as his companion. Yet it was precisely these fragments of hardship that forged the unyielding spirit of Philip. He was first sent to school in France, then Germany, then in the looming shadow of fascism. Eventually, he was moved to Gordonstown, a strict boarding school in Scotland. There, students woke at dawn, washed their own clothes, ran for hours in the cold, and were given no room for weakness. While other aristocratic children struggled to adapt, Philip thrived. He found something familiar in the discipline, perhaps a sense of control he had never known in his childhood. Gordonstown taught him not only how to survive, but also how to suppress emotions, how to act like a rock, a trait that would later define his role as husband to a reigning monarch. That stormy youth etched a singular personality into him. Reticent, cold, but sharp and immensely proud. Philip had no patience for sentimentality. He despised weakness and pity. To him, survival meant standing on one's own feet, even when alone amidst the grandeur yet unfamiliarity of the British royal family. When he married Elizabeth, he did not merely give up his religion, nationality, and surname. He gave up his wounded ego to become the loyal shadow of a woman who would be queen to millions, but not the kind of wife who could confide in him each night. And perhaps, for that reason, in his final years, he chose Wood Farm, not out of anger or isolation, but simply to reconnect with the part of himself he had once lost. In that modest wooden house in Sandringham, there were no solemn guards, no glittering silver banquets, only the peace that a man who had known loneliness since childhood could truly appreciate. It was where he could be himself, away from the palace's prying eyes, and the place where he left behind secrets only those who truly understood him, like Princess Anne, might someday explain. It was through those storm-filled years and lack of familial shelter that Philip learned to survive like a lone warrior, and it was the iron discipline honed at Gordonstown, a school infamous for its military-like rigor, that shaped a man who appeared cold and withdrawn, but was unbreakably tough. Yet, as he stepped into adulthood, The life of this exiled prince took an unexpected turn, becoming deeply entwined with Britain, the very nation that would ultimately define his destiny in ways no one could have foreseen. At first, Philip had little connection with the United Kingdom. Though of European royal blood, he was born in Greece, educated in France, moved to Germany, and only came to England as a last resort, to escape the political chaos engulfing the continent. But it was Britain, with its conservative values, unwavering loyalty to monarchy, and foggy stoicism, that allowed Philip to find his sense of self. He not only integrated but chose to renounce all his titles, an act rarely taken lightly by anyone of royal lineage, to officially become a British subject and receive his new title, Duke of Edinburgh. That decision was more than political. It was a firm declaration that Philip was ready to leave behind a troubled past, a displaced royal house, and the shattered memories of childhood, to build a new chapter aligned with the fate of the British royal family. The name Philip of Greece now wore the mantle of a British duke, a symbol of submission, loyalty, and a lifelong commitment to a once foreign country that had now become everything. But a haunting question still quietly echoes. Did the fractures and losses of his childhood silently shape the way Philip coped with the pressures of royal life later on? Did the psychological scars of his youth, witnessing his mother being committed to a mental asylum, his father abandoning the family to live a hedonistic life in France, and himself drifting from one dormitory and boarding school to another, make him distant from tender emotions, cold in his relationships with his own children, and perhaps even with Queen Elizabeth? The answer, perhaps, lies in the very way he lived, unyielding to the point of cruelty, principled to the point of extremity, and at times, so distant that others found him unreachable. Yet it was that very severity that made him the quiet but indispensable pillar beside the Queen for more than 70 years. Not one step back, not a single complaint. He was the man who gave up his own royal position to stand behind someone else's throne, a silent yet unwavering presence. And it all began with a fateful decision, to fully bind his life to Britain. Prince Philip's life entered a dramatic new chapter when he left behind the remnants of his exiled childhood to step into a path with no return. Love for a girl born to wear a crown. Their first meeting was in 1934 at a royal wedding. Elizabeth was just 8 years old, while Philip, the young naval prince, was 13. Unaware that destiny had already written their names onto the same page of history. Nearly a decade later, in 1939, when Elizabeth was 13 and Philip 18, they met again during a visit to the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. What seemed like a chance encounter became the spark that ignited a love that would endure for over 70 years. From innocent, affectionate letters, a quiet but enduring love began to grow, surpassing all royal conventions of the time. Many within the royal family and the British government expressed hesitation, even opposition, to Elizabeth's choice. Although of royal blood, Philip was an outsider, a prince of Greece and Denmark with no country, no fortune, and 3 sisters who had all married Germans, including a member of the Nazi Party. To Britain's conservative aristocracy, he was coarse, unfamiliar with the Windsor family's elaborate traditions. Yet Elizabeth did not waver. Her love was not merely emotion. It was a clear and unshakable choice. The future queen declared, "He is the one I love, and I shall not marry anyone else." On November 20th, 1947, Elizabeth and Philip were married at Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was broadcast live on television, a first in royal history, capturing the attention of millions of Britons struggling to rise from the ashes of World War II. They became a symbol of new hope, a radiant young royal couple in a dark time. But behind the applause and smiles, the first quiet challenges had already begun to surface. Philip, once a naval officer used to freedom and military discipline, suddenly had to learn how to stand behind a woman, not just a wife, but the future of an entire nation. He was forced to give up his career, his personal status, and even his own name. The royal family's decision to keep the name House of Windsor instead of adopting Mountbatten, Philip's surname, left him bitter enough to cry out in despair, "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba here." Although Elizabeth later compromised by giving their children the surname Mountbatten-Windsor, the initial wound of that rejection left a scar in a man used to commanding his own fate. As for Elizabeth, she too found herself in difficult positions, constantly trying to balance her role as wife and future monarch. How could she preserve the integrity of personal love while maintaining the spotless image of the royal family? How could she listen to the man she loved while also requiring him to step back so she could step forward as queen? The long nights of argument, the heavy moments in Buckingham Palace, none of it was seen by the public, but it certainly existed. A lingering question haunted those who witnessed their relationship. Did their differences in background, role, and ambition drive them apart? Or was it love, something even a throne cannot command, that kept them together? The truth is, despite being caught in moments of anger and inevitable conflict, the bond between Philip and Elizabeth endured like an unbreakable fortress. She respected him as a partner and spiritual anchor. He, though forced to live in the shadow of the title husband of the Queen, silently stood by her side for 70 years, never once leaving. When asked about his role, Philip once said, "My job is to enable the Queen to do her job." A simple sentence that encapsulates a lifetime of sacrifice, loyalty, and timeless love. They were not a perfect fairy tale couple, but precisely because they were not perfect, because they weathered storms, dared to love in a world full of restrictions and prejudice, their love story became more extraordinary than any other royal tale. And that is also why the public did not only admire Elizabeth. They learned to value Philip too, the man who stood behind the throne, yet became the irreplaceable soul of the modern British monarchy. In the dim light of the post-war years, as Britain struggled to regain its balance between tradition and modernity, between the legacy of empire and the burden of national reconstruction, a silent storm was quietly forming within the ancient stone walls of Buckingham Palace. It was not a political upheaval, nor a crisis of the throne, but a doubt, a rumor with the explosive power of a ticking time bomb. The one at the center of it was none other than Prince Philip, and the eye of the storm revolved around a single name, Galina Ulanova, the legendary Soviet ballet dancer, a woman who emerged from the mist of steel and frost, beautiful, mysterious, and belonging to a world that Britain at the time regarded as an enemy. In the smoldering context of the Cold War, rumors that the husband of Queen Elizabeth II had associated with someone like Galina Ulanova were not merely an attack on his private life. They were a political and national security warning, because a senior member of the British royal family involved with a Soviet artist could not be dismissed as just a bedroom scandal. So, how did the rumor begin? Perhaps no one could say for certain, but grainy black and white photographs, anonymous accounts from diplomatic circles, and especially the fact that Philip had taken a short trip to Europe at the same time Ulanova was performing in London. All of these became fuel for the media's imagination. And so, from international newsrooms to whispered gossip within palace corridors, the story spread. They said he was enchanted by her like a sailor mesmerized by the siren's song. They said he secretly met Ulanova backstage at a private performance, where she danced not just with her body but with her soul. Queen Elizabeth heard it all, but she never spoke a word. In the eyes of the public, she remained the unshakable symbol of the United Kingdom. Not a single tear fell in public. Not a word of complaint left the palace walls. Yet, in the shadows, It was said that she once walked alone all night through the gardens of Balmoral Castle. Alone, no guards, no sound, as if trying to rediscover the warmth of a love that once burned bright, but now remained only ashes scattered by the wind of suspicion. Philip, true to his stubborn and blunt nature, gave no explanation, nor did he deny anything. He was once described as not a man of flowery words or justifications. He scoffed when reporters asked about Ulanova. "If I were having an affair, do you think I would be stupid enough to get involved with a Soviet ballerina?" That was his curt but heavily loaded reply. Perhaps it was a denial. Perhaps it was a proud confession in disguise. Within the family, undercurrents began to swell. Prince Andrew, still very young at the time, always defended his father. He would later say in an interview many years after, "My father is the most devoted man to his family that I have ever known. He may be cold, but he never betrayed my mother." But were the words of a son enough to erase thousands of tabloid headlines, when Philip's own silence only added fuel to the fire? Many believed that if the story were true, it would not only be a betrayal of love, but also a betrayal of the nation's trust. Because Queen Elizabeth was not just a wife, she was a symbol, the head of the Church of England, the embodiment of dignity and resilience. If her heart were wounded by the one man closest to her, who else could believe in the traditional values of the monarchy? However, one truth must be spoken, whether true or false. The rumor about Ulanova cannot be viewed solely through the lens of romance. It was also a stark reflection of the loneliness in a marriage bound by ritual and duty. Philip, once a free naval officer, was now confined to endless ceremonies, to bowing before his own wife, to stepping behind her every time they appeared in public, a part of his wild spirit. The man of the sea and of adventure may have felt suffocated. Galina Ulanova, if she truly had a connection with Philip, might not have been just a lover. She may have symbolized liberation, a glimpse of a world without crowns, without protocol, without the watchful eyes of an entire nation. And that is what made the suspicion so dangerous. Not only because it struck at the heart of the Queen, but because it opened a crack in the untouchable image of the British monarchy. But then time passed. Ulanova returned to the Soviet Union and never mentioned Philip again. The prince continued his role alongside Elizabeth for many more decades. Until the day he passed away, they still appeared together, still smiled, still held hands on special occasions, and the British public, having grown accustomed to rumors, gradually let that story fade into oblivion. However, in the memory of those who lived through that era, the name Ulanova remains a fine but deep scratch in the legend of love between Philip and Elizabeth. It raises an unanswerable question. Was their love strong enough to overcome every storm? Or were they merely people bound by fate, choosing silence to preserve the crown? The truth may have been buried along with love letters never made public, locked diaries, and the quiet glances in the night of a queen who never shed tears before her people. Galina Ulanova, that mysterious ballerina, vanished into history like a ghost. But it was that very shadow that forced the public once again to confront the eternal question: how much of it was true love? And how much of it was the necessary endurance to uphold a monarchy? On a quiet morning in mid-2017, while much of the public was still engrossed in the glimmering, never-ending royal affairs at Buckingham Palace, a silent yet seismic decision was made. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the lifelong companion of Queen Elizabeth II for more than 70 years, unexpectedly announced his retirement at the age of 96. No more attending tedious ceremonies, no more cheerful smiles for the cameras at statue unveilings or handshakes with heads of state. Instead, he retreated to Wood Farm, a small house tucked away within the Sandringham Estate, to live what he once whispered to an old friend as a life without rushed morning shaves and no longer needing to bow to anyone. To the media, It was just a short, procedural official announcement. But to those who understood the inner workings of the court and closely followed every royal movement, it was an unexpected turn. One that could even be called a silent declaration from Philip after a lifetime spent in the shadow of the throne. He did not leave the family, nor did he separate from the Queen, but he chose just enough distance to live in line with his strong, independent, and unrestrained nature. A Navy man once used to the freedom of the seas, a man born a Prince of Greece who had spent his entire life bowing to British protocol, had finally reclaimed something he had traded for decades: his autonomy. Princess Anne, his only daughter, quickly spoke up to calm public speculation. She emphasized that this decision was not the result of any fracture in her parents' marriage. On the contrary, it was proof of a relationship deep enough to understand each other without needing to be near each other all the time. According to Anne, Philip's retreat to Wood Farm was a previously agreed-upon arrangement between him and the Queen. A respectful agreement rather than a separation. But her words could not silence the wave of rumors beginning to stir in the European media. Some insider sources revealed that Philip had often complained about feeling suffocated by the rigid protocols at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. He felt exhausted being surrounded by advisors, guards, and unnecessary but unavoidable rules. At Wood Farm, he could wake up whenever he pleased, wear whatever he liked, cycle alone to the sea, or sit for hours in the reading room undisturbed. No one reminded him to appear before the press, no echoing footsteps, no formal greetings, just him, too, and moments that were truly his own. For Queen Elizabeth, this may have been one of her quietest sacrifices. For many years, she considered Philip her unwavering support, emotionally and politically, accepting his physical absence, even if only a few hours away, was proof that true love does not need to keep someone beside you, but instead gives them the space to be who they truly are. A love that had weathered so many storms, from wartime to endless scandals involving their children, was now tested again by voluntary separation. And as she always did, the Queen chose silence, letting her heart speak through the rare, quiet visits she made to Wood Farm, without cameras, without protocol. But the media was not so easily appeased. Numerous articles began questioning whether Philip's separate living arrangement was truly just retirement, or a way for him to escape the pressures of a family gradually spiraling out of control amidst scandals involving Prince Andrew, tensions between William and Harry, and the Queen's increasingly fragile health. Perhaps Wood Farm was not merely a holiday home, but rather a spiritual bunker, where Philip quietly observed the empire he had been devoted to for his entire life, slowly transforming day by day. And there was another element that kept this decision an ongoing topic of discussion. Was his separation a silent act of rebellion against the role he had been forced to assume for so many years? The role of the Queen's shadow. Although he was respected within the military, Philip always had to walk behind his wife, as required by royal protocol. Each public appearance saw him as the Queen's consort, never standing alone as an independent figure. In his youth, he had once grumbled that his children did not bear the Mountbatten name. In his later years, he came to accept the things he could not change. Yet a quiet dissatisfaction always simmered within. Now, at Wood Farm, he could simply be Philip, a man in his own right. No longer Philip, the ceremonious duke. Yet, within the solitude he chose, there remained a proud image. Neighbors recalled that he maintained a neat, disciplined lifestyle. He woke early in the morning, exercised, read newspapers, did crossword puzzles, and wrote handwritten letters to old friends from the military. He continued chatting with staff, drove himself to the sea when the weather was calm, and, above all, never allowed anyone to serve him excessively. That simple life was not just a reward of old age, but the final declaration of a man who had once been the firmest, most spirited and uncompromising figure in the royal family. And then, when he passed away in 2021, at the very place he had chosen to retreat to, there were no more doubts. Wood Farm was not an escape, but a resting point in an extraordinary journey, a final place where he could live true to himself, shed all burdens, and step away from the spotlight he had once stood in to serve the nation, but where he had also left too much of himself behind. The final question remains unanswered. Was that decision to live separately a silent declaration of personal freedom, or a sign that even the greatest love needs space to breathe? Or, more accurately, was it the most beautiful proof of a mature love? One that does not require closeness every day, but still knows that, no matter the distance, the heart always turns toward a single place. A place Philip called home. In the eerie stillness of the pandemic in 2020, when the entire world was drowning in anxiety and isolation, something unusual happened behind the ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle. While the United Kingdom was under lockdown and invisible fear cloaked every corner of daily life, Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II, two symbolic figures of a century-spanning monarchy, chose to reunite. Gone were the grand rituals, the hundreds of receptions, the binding national duties. All that remained were two aged, weathered individuals, facing each other in a vast, hauntingly silent castle. After 3 years of living separately at Wood Farm in the peaceful lands of Sandringham, where he sought simplicity and his final breath of freedom, Philip returned to Windsor to live with Elizabeth during a time of global upheaval. This prompted many within the royal family and media to ask, was this a reaffirmation of a love long buried under silence? Or was it simply practical, as two elderly people could no longer manage on their own during a deadly pandemic? Whatever the reason, the time spent at Windsor left behind unforgettable moments for all members of the royal family. As Princess Anne shared in a private interview after her father's funeral, she said, "It was the first time in many years that I saw my mother and father talking without being interrupted by protocol or aides. It was as if they had rediscovered a rhythm of their own, something that time and duty had swept away." Prince Charles, who had a complex relationship with his father, also admitted that the period helped him understand more clearly the roots of his own identity. He recounted that during one special evening, when the whole family joined a Zoom call for Philip's birthday, he saw the gentle look his father gave his mother, and for the first time in many years, he felt something that could only be described as peace. But perhaps the one who understood most deeply what was happening was Elizabeth herself. For a woman who had witnessed the ups and downs of more than 7 decades of reign, the days living with Philip in the twilight of life were not merely a matter of convenience during a pandemic. It was destiny's final gift, a chance for them to relive those simple years before the throne pulled them into the endless vortex of duty and distance. Then, in April 2021, the world seemed to fall silent when Buckingham Palace announced the heartbreaking news. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, had passed away at the age of 99, just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. He died in his sleep, at Windsor Castle, where he and Elizabeth had spent their final days together. His death was not unexpected. Everyone knew the day would come, but the emotions it left behind were far from gentle. It was not only a loss for the royal family, but the final punctuation mark to a love story that had run parallel to the modern history of Britain. His funeral, limited by pandemic restrictions, was held in a modest fashion, attended by only 30 people. The image of the Queen sitting alone on a cold bench in St. George's Chapel became a haunting symbol of widowhood's loneliness, regardless of title or power. She did not shed tears in public, but her gaze upon the royal standard-draped coffin said it all. a profound loss that no words could ever express. Philip's legacy was not confined to the 73 years of marriage he devoted to Elizabeth. It was also the image of a steel-willed man, always standing behind but never fading, who gave up a promising naval career to become the unwavering support for a young queen. Though he was sometimes criticized for inappropriate remarks or his stern demeanor, Philip remained the embodiment of a loyal and devoted husband in a world where such values were becoming increasingly rare. Their marriage, in the end, was a symbol of timeless steadfastness. From the days when Elizabeth was still a young princess to when she became the queen of over a quarter of the world, Philip was always by her side, not as a shadow, but as a silent pillar. They endured countless trials, from scandals involving their children, rumors of infidelity, geographic distance, to public pressure. Yet, they continued to walk hand in hand until the very end. The final lingering question in the public's mind was the reunion at Windsor in their final days, a carefully orchestrated act of fate, allowing Elizabeth and Philip to conclude their long journey with a complete chapter. Or was it simply the inevitable consequence of the pandemic, a time when people were forced to retreat within the boundaries of their closest relationships? Whatever it may have been, for many, it was a fitting ending, a long life, a lasting love, and a peaceful death beside the only life partner he had ever known, ever trusted, and ever loved. Elizabeth once said, "Philip is my strength, the one I lean on." Now that he is gone, she no longer has that support. But the rest of Britain, and the world, will always remember him as the man who chose to love, chose to stand behind, and chose to remain loyal until the end. And perhaps, in that fleeting moment when the world quieted due to a pandemic, that enduring love spoke loudest, not with romantic words or grand gestures, but with a deep, silent strength, noble and resolute, just like Philip himself. A legacy that needs no monuments, no medals, because the memories of her, of their children, and of the nation are already an eternal reward. In the new light that Princess Anne courageously illuminated, the entire love story spanning more than 70 years between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip was suddenly seen through an entirely different lens. The years of living apart, once perceived as a fracture, were now revealed as a practical and understanding choice. A silent agreement full of respect between two people who had dedicated their entire lives to duty and honor, not because their love had faded, but because they both understood that if they could not be near each other at all times, they could at least give one another a space of their own, without resentment, without force, simply with absolute trust. And it was in that very silence that true love remained intact. Therefore, the death of Prince Philip in April 2021 was no longer a cold end to a royal marriage. On the contrary, it became a moving pause, the conclusion of a magnificent life chapter written in steadfastness, endurance, and profound respect between two individuals who had always been the pillars of the United Kingdom through an era of immense upheaval. Philip did not merely pass away in peace. He left this world with his heart still turned toward the woman he had loved since his days as a young naval officer, and had never stopped loving. Despite all the storms of history and family, the essence of a marriage does not lie in being together every single day, but in the fact that, after distance and time apart, they still look at each other with the same gaze as in the beginning. With Princess Anne's words, all suspicions, all whispers, all doubts about Philip's coldness or Elizabeth's loneliness in her final years were swept away. There was no tragedy, no abandonment, only an aged, matured love that had weathered the storm and stood strong like an ancient tree, its exterior perhaps rough, but its roots deeply anchored in the soil of devotion. If there is a message to be drawn from the final chapter of that love, It is this: no love exists without challenges, but no challenge can bring down true love. If both people choose to stand together, even if, at times, only in silence, the relationship between Philip and Elizabeth was far from perfect. It had faced crises, rumors, coldness, and even cruel personal sacrifices. But in the end, they still held hands in the corridors of Windsor Castle during the pandemic, quietly watching the chaos of the world outside, and cherishing every last moment they had together. And perhaps it was the pandemic, a harsh event that seemed to push people apart, that became their final opportunity to reaffirm one thing: we do not need to live forever to love completely. We only need the right moment, enough sincerity, and a heart that refuses to let go. In the quiet space of Windsor Castle, there were no media lights, no dazzling royal ceremonies, only two elderly people sharing breakfast, telling old stories, laughing together, and closing their eyes in peace. That was the true legacy. Not the throne, not power, but love. The only thing that remains when all titles have faded into the past. They lived, loved, and departed like quiet companions. Unpretentious, unceremonious, yet it was that very simplicity that became an eternal symbol of loyalty and love, of courage in choosing to walk together through both darkness and light. Today, when people look back on the lives of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, they no longer speak primarily of war, politics, or royal scandals. They remember them as an old married couple who proved that, despite all the storms of history, love, if deep enough, can surpass even time and death. And now, it is your turn, the one reading these words, to reflect and feel. What do you think of this 73-year-long marriage? Do you see it as a modern-day fairy tale, or simply a testament to the sacrifices made between two grown individuals within the boundaries of responsibility? Leave your comment below. Type 1 if you admire the perseverance, faithfulness, and dedication they showed, or 0 if you believe there are still untold stories, secrets that only history will gradually reveal. Because, like everything in the royal family, there are always things that quietly drift in the shadows. Do not forget to hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you untold stories from behind the closed doors of the British monarchy. Behind those doors, there is not just a throne and duty. There is also love, tears, inner conflict, and relationships as complex as any classic tragedy by Shakespeare. And finally, if anything lingers after all is said and done, perhaps it is this, quote, "Despite distance and challenge, Philip and Elizabeth proved that true love can surpass all limits, leaving behind an everlasting legacy. A legacy not only inscribed in the history books, but in the very hearts of those who have ever believed in a love that is enduring, unglamorous, but infinitely great."